My name is Christine, and I'll be talking about how technological advancement is ruining the ability of the younger generation to interact socially. My three supporting claims for this proposition is going to be that the advancement of technology has made the younger generation addicted. And the second one is that it has ruined the person's attention span, memory, and just their brain. The technological advancements for my third claim overall negatively affects the social world. So my first point is that technological advancement makes the younger generation addicted. We can make personal observations. We wake up every day probably with our phone connected really close by. First thing that we do, so we wake up, we check our phone, and we check Instagram, social media, emails, whatever it may be. We also can see when we walk around, we just see the top of people's heads. We don't see eyes, we see everyone's heads down, and we see while we're in classrooms, we're waiting for the professor, we're all on our phones waiting for the professor. The CNN reporter Kelly Wallace reports statistics from a poll conducted for Common Sense Media that 50% of teens feel that they are addicted to their mobile devices, 69% of parents and 78% of teens check their devices at least hourly. I check my phone probably every 5 seconds because I have an Apple Watch, so I'm pretty addicted too. Majority of parents, 66% of them, feel that their teens spend too much time on their mobile devices. Because of this addiction, because that they're so addicted to checking their phone for any resources, that leads to my second point, that teens and just people in general, they have ruined their attention span, their memory, and just the brain capacity. This doesn't mean that technology has made us stupid, but Laura Prendergast from the Spectator podcast, she reports that neurologists talk about plasticity of the brain. Towards the end of it, it just means that our brains are changing to meet the demands of this high-octane modern world. It just means that our brains are changing to the culture around us. As we are meeting new people, we add them on Snapchat, we get their phone numbers, and we have their phone numbers saved. From then on, we don't have the need to remember their phone numbers. We don't have the need to memorize their name and their phone number. It just comes in a contact now. Same thing goes with finding directions. We used to download MapQuest and print out the directions and remember them so you're not looking at it while you're driving, but you have to remember the directions, you remember the street names, you're more observant. But now people have just become more reliant on technology, listening to Siri when to turn left in the next 300 feet. Self-instructions, and towards the end of her article, her podcast, she says, why bother learning 10 things when your phone can find out any one of a million things in a few seconds? This leads to my third point, that the technological advancements overall negatively affects our social world. Danielle Campbell from the Odyssey, she's a reporter, she says that communication is slowly decreasing to a point where children and adolescents have trouble even initiating face-to-face communication, holding a conversation, because it's always done through a text message. These children are also developing an inability to read social cues and have empathy. Unless they are speaking to others face-to-face, they won't practice as they grow up of reading social cues. So because this relates to my second point of how people are becoming more dependent on technology, their attention span is becoming shorter because of all the notifications that we have on our phone. They're becoming more, their memory is becoming worse, and now their social cues are becoming horrible because they're on their phone, they're texting their friends. It may be FaceTime, but there's no human interaction, which lacks empathy, and now they're unable to have the social cue. And how is that going to help them in the future? As they're growing up in school, how are they going to make friends if they're not normally in that social environment, if they're just at home scrolling through feeds instead of being outside interacting with their neighbors? Also, as they become older and they have to go through interviews, they're not going to be able to know how to maintain eye contact, how to talk to this person face to face and maintain that kind of conversation, and reading the social cues of when you should speak and when you should let the other person speak. I think that's important. And also just getting along with coworkers, I think that ruins how people that goes in ties with social views. And this also leads to the social world because cyberbullying is a thing, and as people become more comfortable on being behind a screen and laying in their phones on social media. They're more comfortable behind a screen rather than being in person. And there's statistics from the Teen Safety website that spreads awareness on cyberbullying. 30% of victims turn to self-harm, 30% of victims have suicidal thoughts, and 10% attempt to take their lives. And this is all because people have become more comfortable behind a screen rather than being in person, and thus they lose empathy. And therefore, I lost my spot. So with these statistics and reports in mind, I'll emphasize again how technological advancements have made our younger generation addicted and ruined their attention span, memory, and overall negatively affects their social interactions. These are the reasons why technological advancements is ruining the ability of the younger generation to interact socially. Thank you.
All right, I thought you rushed a little bit through the proposition at the beginning, but I understood generally where you were headed, and it's very clear at the end. There's a good label of the supporting structure also, so there's a solid preview of what the material is going to be, and in the body of the speech, you're doing a good job signposting that as well. There's usually a little bit of explanation on each of those points, which is what we need. There's some interesting data that you're using to indicate these problems. Some of it is poll-based data, so this self-reported data about how the students feel about their addictive behavior or about how their parents feel about these kinds of things. Since it is talking about personal behavior, I think that that's probably a little bit more relevant than it would be in other contexts. So I don't have a problem with the public opinion data that you're using here. The second point, when you're talking about it's changing the way we think or operate, you've got a lot of hypotheticals that you use on this particular point. People in classes or walking down the street, that sort of thing. And then you've got a quote that from an authority that talks about plasticity of the brain and how it's changing to adjust to those sorts of things. That might be true, but what I'm wondering is, well, how does that show that it's ruining the ability to do that? That, I think, is a little bit more problematic. It sounds to me like the brain is changing in a way to reflect the culture that people live in, as opposed to creating a culture that is harder for people to live in. And there's a difference in those two perspectives. You do kind of have an explanation about why you think that's true, especially when we're talking about the ability to read and follow social cues that people get from others. You come back to the issue of it being addictive, and that's just what we do, and we learn to do that, as opposed to we fail to learn to do the face-to-face interaction. And I thought you could use a little bit more information on that point. The issue about cyberbullying seems to come out of nowhere. There might be a connection to what you're talking about there, but it needs to be established earlier. It just feels like it's an addendum that is completely disconnected from the rest of your argument. And so I would probably leave that out, or if you're going to use it, kind of tie it into the screen issue that you're talking about. But that's about the closest I could see it being related to that. I thought there's a pretty good summary at the end of the speech, and I like the fact that you have a much clearer statement of the proposition at the end that makes it easier for all of us to know exactly what it was we were supposed to get out of your presentation. Thank you.